When it comes to the history of animation, there's not much debate over who the big three animation studios are: Disney, Pixar, and DreamWorks. These three studios have had the strongest combination of critical praise, blockbuster hits, and lasting cultural appeal. But only one of these studios surprisingly never had a billion-dollar film. One of these studios has notably struggled financially far more than the other two studios. One of these two why am I even talking to you as though this is a mystery? It's DreamWorks. So why is it that one of the titans of animation failed to ever cross the billion-dollar milestone? How is it that even a studio like Illumination that has lasted for a much shorter time and makes worse movies managed to cross the billion-dollar mark many times more than DreamWorks? Well, I've broken it down into about 4 reasons that I think best explain why this is the case. So, without further introduction, DreamWorks' prime years arguably began with just their second movie being The Prince of Egypt. At the time of its release, it was one of the most successful non-Disney animated movies in history. But upon 2001, with the release of Shrek, DreamWorks' prime years had undeniably started. Shrek took the world by storm through its edgy humor and sharp satire of Disney. Disney was struggling a lot during the early 2000s, so Shrek's mockery of the studio stood out significantly more, as Disney was struggling to reinvent themselves without many of the tropes that Shrek was mocking. But the success of Shrek was quite massive. It grossed nearly $500 million at the box office, becoming the 4th highest grossing movie of 2001. And famously, it managed to beat Pixar's Monsters, Inc. for Best Animated Feature. But guess how many billion-dollar movies came out in 2001? Absolutely zero. The highest grossing movie of 2001 was Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, which grossed about $975 million, still $25 million below the billion-dollar mark. And herein lied a big problem that was going to hurt DreamWorks during this time period. See, the problem was that billion-dollar animated movies were not that common during most of DreamWorks' prime. The first billion-dollar animated movie did not come out until 2010 with Toy Story 3. But prior to 2010, Disney hadn't had their full resurgence yet, Pixar hadn't begun cashing out on their Golden Age originals through sequels, and Illumination didn't even exist. But around 2010, the global box office started to expand into broader territories, which strengthened the capability of reaching $1 billion. So even though DreamWorks was massively influential during the 2000s, even though they were creating multiple iconic and successful franchises, and even though they arguably went toe-to-toe with Pixar as the premier animation studio amidst Disney's struggles, they unfortunately were achieving all of this before the billion-dollar animation era. But despite all of this, DreamWorks actually did get pretty darn close to reaching $1 billion before 2010. In 2004, DreamWorks released Shrek 2, a highly anticipated sequel to their cultural juggernaut from 2001. The movie became the highest grossing film of 2004 and raked in about $935 million. It was actually the highest grossing animated movie of all time, just before the first billion-dollar animated movie in 2010. How unfortunate is that? In all honesty, DreamWorks really had 2 golden opportunities to pass $1 billion. One would have been Shrek 3, and the second, to a much lesser extent, would have been Madagascar 3. From the unprecedented box office success that Shrek 2 was, it was clear that the Shrek franchise was top-tier blockbuster cinema in the global box office. And given that Shrek 2 managed to maintain the same level of quality that gravitated many people to Shrek 1, that certainly helped boost its box office numbers. And As seen in Toy Story 3, as well as many other Part 3s, the final film in a trilogy often enjoys some of the highest box office returns in the franchise. So, Shrek 3 could have been a golden opportunity for DreamWorks to capitalize off the hype and success of Shrek 1 and 2. And then Shrek 3 was kind of trash and ended up ruining that. Because of Shrek 3's significantly weaker quality than the first two movies, word of mouth helped diminish the momentum of Shrek 3 reaching $1 billion. Given how disappointing the movie was, not many people were as interested in repeat viewings as they would have been had Shrek 3 been on the level of quality as the first two movies. Shrek 3 really helped introduce a level of franchise fatigue into the Shrek franchise. But then, there was Madagascar 3. This movie was released in 2012, so the $1 billion era for animated movies had just been kicking off. And again, similar to Shrek 3 and Toy Story 3, it was a third part to a financially successful animated franchise. But unfortunately, the Madagascar franchise simply wasn't popular enough to garner $1 billion. Plus, it also had to compete with Ice Age Continental Drift from Blue Sky. And unfortunately, Madagascar 3 somewhat marked the end of DreamWorks' prime era. After that, the studio started to go through many more financial struggles, starting with The Rise of the Guardians, which released later on in the same year, and it bombed pretty badly. So to some extent, DreamWorks was simply the victim of bad timing, and they fell on economic hard times at the worst moment during the peak of financial success for animated movies. However, with Shrek 5 in the making, perhaps DreamWorks could have another shot at $1 billion movie, especially with how Puss in Boots 2 revived many people's interest in the Shrek franchise. When it comes to almost any field of business, brand consistency is often very important, and that is no different in the animation industry. Throughout the century-long existence of Disney, they built a brand reputation around whimsical musicals and adventurous movies. Pixar built their brand reputation around revolutionary CGI animation, unique concepts, and deep emotional storytelling. And even Illumination built a reliable brand reputation as being safe, cartoonish, hyperactive kids movies with easily translatable humor. By contrast, DreamWorks somewhat struggled in this area. They can release serious dramatic epics like How to Train Your Dragon or Prince of Egypt, then edgy, irreverent comedies like Shrek, then totally childish crap like The Boss Baby. And having an unpredictable variety of movie types doesn't mean that a studio can't have very successful films, because again, DreamWorks is still considered a top 3 animation studio in history. But when trying to establish a brand reputation, it's much harder to earn the audience's trust, especially to the level of $1 billion movie with so much inconsistency. Families go into Disney movies expecting classical prestige. Or at least they used to. They go into Pixar movies expecting creative, emotional prestige, and they go into Illumination movies expecting fast-paced laughs for the kids. They have a much harder time knowing what to expect from DreamWorks, which can gradually lower their overall box office return. I touched on bits of this point in my prior reasons, but I wanted to go deeper into it. During the beginning years of DreamWorks as well as into its prime, the only studios that it really had to worry about was, well, just one, Pixar. As I mentioned earlier, Disney was struggling during the 2000s, and Illumination didn't exist yet. Studio Ghibli existed, but they generally lean more towards prestige art house-esque movies instead of blockbusters. Sony was just getting started in the mid-2000s, and they also kinda sucked. I guess Blue Sky was a competitor to some extent during the 2000s, but they still weren't on the level of Pixar and DreamWorks. DreamWorks had a much greater opportunity to thrive amidst a titan studio in hibernation and amidst much less saturation in the animation market. But then, in the mid-2000s, Disney fully acquired Pixar, which gave Pixar an upper hand in marketing reach and also allowed Disney to receive assistance from John Lasseter in reviving their studio. As a result, DreamWorks had a much more difficult time competing as Pixar was connected to the Disney empire, giving them much stronger global reach and influence, along with the fact that the quality of Disney's movies were rapidly improving, at least in the public's eyes. And it's likely that Disney's acquisition of Pixar played a major role in Pixar's increase of sequel production, which again increased Pixar's chances of achieving billion-dollar movies. So by the 2010s, DreamWorks was now competing with a sequel-powered Pixar, a revived Disney, and of course, the immense explosion in popularity of the Minions. But not only was DreamWorks competing with Disney Animation Studios, they were also competing with Disney remakes. Disney kicked their remake production into hyperdrive during the 2010s, and many of those movies were just printing money for the studio. And given that the majority of Disney remakes still fall into the family-oriented genre, with one being straight-up animation, these remakes were still tapping into the wallets of the same audience that DreamWorks was trying to reach. And on top of that, DreamWorks still had to compete with the Ice Age sequels and the growth of numerous other animated studios, such as the Lego franchise from Warner Bros. And the Angry Birds and Hotel Transylvania movies from Sony. So, to put it in perspective, DreamWorks' highest grossing movie is still Shrek 2. At its peak, Shrek 2 was actually the highest grossing animated movie of all time, prior to the re-releases of The Lion King and Finding Nemo. Now, it fell to 20th. Yikes. When it comes to DreamWorks, they are undoubtedly a studio that goes all in on quantity. That's why, despite the fact that DreamWorks was founded 3 years after Pixar, they have nearly double the movies. It seemed as though DreamWorks figured that with a higher quantity of movies, it set them up to make more money through sheer volume. After all, if, say, a single animated movie from a studio averaged around $100 million in profit per year, then 2 animated movies in a year would bring in at least $200 million in profit. Right? This is sort of like YouTubers who think posting random videos every single day will automatically translate into tons of views. Of course, DreamWorks' strategy was likely more layered than that. I'm just simplifying it for simplicity's sake. Simplifying for simplicity's sake? What an awful sentence. Throughout the mid-2000s and 2010s, DreamWorks was regularly releasing 2 to 3 movies a year. Unfortunately, with this strategy can come major problems. With so many movies coming out, creative talent can get stretched thin, leading to more clunky and inconsistent movies. Phase 4 of the MCU would be a perfect example of this problem. But DreamWorks was also affected by this problem, leading to their inconsistent brand reputation that I discussed earlier. In fact, DreamWorks' multi-film release strategy probably caused some of their films to get overshadowed by their own movies released during the same year. But on top of that, this strategy also came with big financial problems. With so much money being stretched for rapid and expensive production, it likely gave significantly less money for marketing. So even if DreamWorks made a quality movie, less people were aware of it, leading to more box office bombs. This is probably one of the reasons why DreamWorks has so many underrated movies. How many times have you heard people bring up a DreamWorks flop and talk about what a great movie it was? It happened with Megamind, Mr. Peabody and Sherman, Rise of the Guardians, Turbo... Nice try. Nice try. But through its overwhelming quantity of movies in such a short time frame, as well as its multiple box office bombs, it's a lot easier for good DreamWorks movies to fly under the radar. And then, moving into the 2020s, DreamWorks started significantly cutting their animation and production budgets in order to improve their profits. For instance, when looking at the Kung Fu Panda franchise, all 3 movies in the original trilogy had a budget that was $130 million or higher, with the highest being $150 million from Kung Fu Panda 2. However, Kung Fu Panda 4 had a budget that was nearly half of that. And DreamWorks has been implementing this strategy multiple times throughout the 2020s. Most of their movies released during this decade have had budgets below or around $100 million. And by cutting all these costs, it did allow DreamWorks to make good profits on multiple movies, but low-budget animated movies, and really low-budget movies in general, typically don't have the intent of reaching $1 billion, and very few of them end up doing that. So with a combination of a very high-volume strategy, as well as a much more recent strategy of significantly slashing their budgets, DreamWorks lowered their chances of reaching billion-dollar movies. As I said before, there is still hope for DreamWorks to achieve this billion-dollar milestone. Even if DreamWorks never did that, their legacy has still firmly been established as one of the most influential animation studios in history. In fact, Shrek became the first animated movie of the 21st century to get selected on the National Film Registry in the Library of Congress, which, if you don't know what that is, I don't know, just ask ChatGPT or something. But it's a very rare feat for most movies, especially animated movies, to achieve. And Shrek 5 still has a great opportunity ahead of them to pass the billion-dollar mark. And DreamWorks probably knows this, which is why they delayed the movie into 2027. There's still a lot of speculations over what the delay was about, but my advice to DreamWorks would be, if you want to maximize your chances of crossing the billion-dollar mark with Shrek 5, definitely try fixing these character designs.